Hi everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to be going over different stabilizers that you can use in your whipped cream frosting for layer cakes. Stabilized whipped cream allows us as home bakers to keep our cakes for a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead and test 5 different common whipped cream stabilizers. We're going to go over how to make them and then the pros and cons of each, and that way you can decide which one's best for your cake. And if you stay till the end, I'll tell you which one's my personal favorite, what I'm going to use in my next video, which is my family's favorite berry chantilly cake. So before designing all these tests, we kind of have to define what stability is in terms of whipped cream frosting. And these are the characteristics that I'd want when we make a stabilized whipped cream frosting. Number 1, when we fill and frost the cake, does it hold up the layers or does it squeeze out the sides? Number 2, does it pipe well? Does it hold the detail or does it leak out liquid and kind of melt over time? And number 3 is kind of a preference, but it's worth observing because it might actually bother you. Does the stabilizer alter the taste or the texture of the finished whipped cream? Okay, here are the stabilizers, which I group into 3 main categories. First are the protein stabilizers. We only have one, and it's gelatin. Second are the starch stabilizers. We'll test a commercially available product known as Whip It or Sahnesteif, and we'll also test good old-fashioned cornstarch. And the third group are the fat stabilizers, and we're going to test mascarpone and Greek yogurt. And with all experiments, we need a control, and a control is just what we compare everything to, so you can kind of think of it as a baseline. This is our regular, unstabilized whipped cream. Okay, so let's start with our control or non-stabilized whipped cream first, and we'll go over how I make whipped cream in general. The first thing we want to do is make sure our bowl and whisk are in the freezer for at least 5 minutes. And once your bowl is nice and cold, add in your heavy whipping cream. The fats contained within heavy cream are solid at cold temperatures. When they're solid, they're better able to encase air pockets that make up our fluffy and light whipped creams. At warm temperatures, those fats melt and they're liquid and they're not able to hold any air at all. So keeping everything cold, from the heavy cream to the equipment that you work with, is the most basic and easiest way to get fluffy whipped cream with no additional stabilizing ingredients. We'll have to sweeten our whipped cream, and for most of the recipes here I'll be using powdered sugar because it's more finely ground and dissolves more readily. Though white granulated sugar should work fine too. Some people like to add their sugar at the beginning and some at the end. I like to add it in the middle when it's just thickened. I feel like I've given a chance for the whipped cream to develop in the beginning without any extra interference, and I feel like if I add it at the end, I run the risk of overmixing the whipped cream, which can make it look grainy. And at your grocery store, you might have a chance to purchase either whipping cream or heavy whipping cream. Cartons labeled with whipping cream contain 30 to 36% fat. Heavy whipping creams contain 36% and above, and that's what we want. Continue until you reach soft peaks, and what that means is when you grab some of the cream on the end of your whisk, it should slightly droop. At this point, I like to either continue to whip on medium-low speed or to remove the bowl and whisk it with my regular whisk by hand. And I do this because it goes from soft peaks to stiff peaks very quickly, and the stand mixer is very powerful. But don't worry, if you overmix your whipped cream and you would like it a little bit softer, all you have to do is pour in a touch more of the heavy whipping cream and whip it a little bit, and it should go back to its creamy, soft texture. Okay, so now that we've made our control whipped cream, I've got some mini sprinkle cakes that I'm going to fill. So we're just going to fill and frost and label this cake, and then keep it in the fridge while I finish the rest. And for the piping, I'm going to use a Wilton 1M and do 3 of the most common designs I usually do with whipped cream. So they're dropped stars, a rope border, and then some roses. Next is our protein stabilized or gelatin whipped cream. We'll first need to prepare the gelatin. I'm using granulated or powdered gelatin that's commonly available to home bakers here in the US. This process here is called blooming. To a small microwave safe bowl, add cold water, then lightly sprinkle the granulated gelatin over the surface of the water. You can gently stir at the end if you need to ensure that everything is all hydrated. The water does have to be cold because warm or hot water initiates the gelling effect of gelatin, and that'll give us a clumpy mass that's going to be difficult to dissolve into the whipped cream later. So after that, allow this to sit while we prepare the whipped cream. Place your bowl and whisk in the freezer for about 5 minutes, and then add in your heavy whipping cream. Go ahead and start that and whip it on medium-high speed. Once it starts to thicken up, stop the mixer, add in your powdered sugar, and then whip that again until it reaches soft peaks. Then grab your gelatin, and it should have a loose yet gelled consistency that looks like this. Microwave it for about 5 seconds, and it should be liquefied at this point, though it should be be somewhat thickened. If you want to test the temperature with your fingers, it should be very warm like bath water, though not boiling hot, because the boiling hot water is going to destroy the protein structure. Now with a mixer on medium speed, slowly pour the gelatin into the cream. You can continue to mix until all the gelatin is mixed in and then go to stiff peaks, or you can stop the mixer and do the rest by hand. You do want to continually mix while adding the gelatin in, otherwise you might get clumps though. You do have to make sure that the gelatin's on the warmer side, because if you try to add gelatin that's too cold to already cold whipped cream, you're going to get chunks of gelatin. After gelatin has been warmed like we just did, any type of cooling will set the gelatin somewhat. So starting off with something warmer allows us to thoroughly mix it into the whipped cream before it gels. So using gelatin is a pretty well-known method for super stabilized whipped cream, but the only caveat here is that you have to use it before it sets. So essentially try to use all of this up before you put any of it in the fridge. Our next whipped cream is stabilized by Whip It or Sahnesteif, which is a commercially available whipped cream stabilizer. The ingredients include sugar, cornstarch, and an anti-caking agent. Start off by placing your bowl and whisk in the freezer for 5 minutes. Then add your heavy whipping cream and your powdered sugar. This is not the cornstarch that you would normally buy in the store, but it's processed in such a way that is able to thicken our whipped creams, and this is important, quickly and without the use of heat. And although the company doesn't specify how this cornstarch is different, my guess is that it means that they grind the cornstarch super fine, which is why they need the anti-caking agent. Whip until you reach soft peaks, which look like this. Then gently sprinkle the Whip It over the top of your whipped cream. Continue to whip on medium-high speed until you reach stiff peaks, or you can remove the bowl and do that part by hand. I found that I've needed much less than what the package indicates, and I'll list those amounts below the video, so you can start at that point and continue to add more as you need. It seems to instantaneously get thicker, so be pretty conservative if it's your first time using it. The next type of starch thickener is just cornstarch. To a small saucepan, add cornstarch and white granulated sugar. Pour in about a quarter of the heavy cream that you intend to whip up, then bring this just to a simmer on medium-low heat, whisking the entire time. Cornstarch is a popular stabilizer, but is often used incorrectly. Unless you're using the Whip It containing the special cornstarch, as in my previous recipe, you must heat it. If you add unheated cornstarch straight up to cold cream, it's just gonna give your whipped cream a grainy texture and not help at all. You can kind of do this experiment on your own. Add a teaspoon of cornstarch to cold water. If anything, the cornstarch doesn't absorb or thicken in any way. It just kind of sinks to the bottom of the bowl. The thickening properties of cornstarch only happens at temperatures above 144 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that we have to apply a little bit of heat, which is what we're doing here. Once you see tiny little bubbles in your pan, you can turn off the heat and notice that it'll be slightly thickened but still somewhat runny. Set that aside to cool a little. Now we're gonna make our whipped cream. So place your bowl and whisk in the freezer for about 5 minutes, then pour the remainder of your heavy whipping cream into that cold bowl and whip on medium-high speed until you reach soft peaks, and this should look like this. Turn your mixer onto medium-low and slowly pour in your slightly cooled cornstarch mixture. Continue to whip until you reach stiff peaks, or you can do this part by hand. Now, out of all the stabilizers, this one took me the most tries to get right. You really had to find a balance of the temperature of the cornstarch mixture. If you let it cool too much, it'll turn hard and it'll be difficult to mix into the cold whipped cream. If the cornstarch mixture is too hot, it can collapse your cream due to the heat. Now let's move on to fat stabilized creams. So essentially we're just adding fat into the whipped cream, which will help us hold more air into the finished whipped cream. First up is to use Greek yogurt, and we'll need full fat because fat is our key ingredient, and I grabbed this particular brand because it's higher in fat than the other ones I found. And Greek is really good because it's super thick. A lot of the water has been drained off, and so that doesn't add any liquid or water into our finished cream. So make sure that you put your mixing bowl and whisk in the freezer for about 5 minutes, then add your heavy whipping cream and Greek yogurt together in the bowl and mix until it starts to thicken up, at which point you can add in your powdered sugar. Then continue to mix on medium-high speed until you reach stiff peaks. Adding yogurt to your whipped cream definitely gives it a noticeable tangy flavor. So you can use my recipe as a starting point, which is definitely on the milder side. If you want a stronger yogurt flavor, you can definitely add more. And the same goes for the amount of sugar to balance off that tanginess. The next fat-based stabilizer is either mascarpone or creme fraiche. You can use either as they both contain a high amount of fat, so they're both going to use this technique. Place your bowl in the freezer for about 5 minutes, then add your mascarpone and whip that until it's soft and creamy. You're going to want to add your mascarpone when it's at a cool room temperature. Not like melty, but I do like to leave mine out of the fridge at room temperature for about a half hour before I need it. If your mascarpone looks curdled while whipping up during this step, it just meant that it was too cold to begin begin with. So just keep whipping it and it'll reach that creamy texture. It shouldn't have any lumps and kind of have the consistency of a soft cream cheese that you'd want to spread on a bagel. Once you reach that step, go ahead and pour in your cold, heavy whipping cream and whip until it's nice and thick, then add your powdered sugar. And then after that, just continue to beat on medium speed or medium high speed until you reach stiff peaks. Alternatively, you can also do this part by hand. Many recipes I see like to add the mascarpone at the end, but I prefer to whip it up with the heavy cream. I feel like if we add it at the end, we're just adding bulk in the form of mascarpone cheese. But by adding it at the beginning, we can put those fat molecules contained within the mascarpone to work as well. So now that we have all of our mini cakes done, we're going to let these sit overnight to see how they do. And I wanted to add a little bit of stress on these mini cakes in the form of weight to kind of simulate what would happen if we baked a real big cake full of decorations and everything. I went ahead and added some tuna cans on top and then into the fridge they go. And here are the results. Straight out of the fridge from being in there overnight, all 6 cakes held their shape except for the control, which had some slight bulging. After 1 hour at room temperature, 2 cakes were noticeably starting to squeeze out, and that was the control and cornstarch. After 2 hours, I saw some additional bulging from the gelatin, which may just because I seemed to overfill this one more than the other cakes. I wasn't too precise with the amount of fillings, which I should have done a better job with. After 3 or 4 hours, the control, cornstarch, and gelatin continued to bulge out further, and the whippet, yogurt, and mascarpone held their weight very well. As for the pipe designs, the gelatin held its shape the best with excellent definition and no leaking. The whippet had medium stiffness, a low amount of leaking, and really good definition. The cornstarch had the least amount of definition, and it leaked a high amount of liquid with soft shapes. The yogurt had very minor leaking but good definition. The mascarpone had medium leaking, good detail, but I did notice that it was a little bit more yellow in color than the others. And the control is here. It had medium leakage, good definition, but a very soft texture. Okay, let's briefly summarize so you can choose the right one. The control is definitely the easiest and quickest to throw together, but it's also the least stable. I usually only make this one if I know the cake will be eaten within the same day. Gelatin is a super reliable ingredient for stabilized desserts and pastry. It is, however, derived from animal bones, so it's not vegetarian and can be slightly spongy in texture when overused. Whippet is very easy to use. It lends a very smooth texture to your whipped cream. However, it may be hard to find, and I had to order mine online. Cornstarch is great in that it doesn't change the taste or texture, but for me, it was kind of annoying to have to heat up a separate pan, and it was difficult to get right for the first few tries. And yogurt as a stabilizer was actually pretty easy to do, although it did lend a very tangy flavor to your whipped cream, which may bother you if you just want a pure whipped cream flavor, and it piped really well. Mascarpone was also very easy to use, just gotta remember to set it out at room temperature. It set up kind of firm, piped really nice. The end result for me was a little bit more yellow than I would have liked. It also has this kind of cheesy or what can be described as a nutty flavor. If that bothers you, you can also sub out for creme fraiche. And which one did I choose to make my berry chantilly cake? Actually, it was 2. I absolutely loved the ease with which the yogurt stabilized whipped cream came together, and I really loved the tangy taste. I will probably be using this if not for all of my whipped cream cakes in the future, a large majority of them. I then stabilized it with just a touch more of the extra whippet, which I added at the end of the whipping process. The end result was tangy, it was creamy, it was delicious, and it held up beautifully for my berry chantilly cake.